Something extraordinary is happening right now in Washington, and it's not coming from the usual opposition. For the first time, Republicans themselves are stepping up to challenge Donald Trump. Behind the scenes, there's a quiet but growing push to block the power he's been fighting to hold on to at any cost. Emergency declarations, warlike rhetoric, and rising panic are beginning to clash with a Congress that is drawing its own line in the sand. This isn't just another political disagreement or breaking news story. This is a moment of reckoning, a test of whether American power is ruled by law or by the unchecked instincts of one man. Stick with me until the end, because what's unfolding could change the way power works in the United States long after the headlines fade. Now, picture this scene unfolding late at night in Washington, phones lighting up across Capitol Hill, aides whispering in hushed tones, senators double-checking their screens as they process the shocking news. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, is furious, but not at the Democrats or the media, as usual. This time, his anger is directed at his own party. For the first time in a long time, the rebellion isn't coming from protesters outside the gates of Washington, but from within. The real danger, as always, begins when the rebellion comes from inside the walls. This is where it gets interesting. Right now, Republicans are rebelling against Donald Trump. But no, this isn't just the typical MAGA infighting or anonymous leaks aimed at scaring donors. This is something much deeper, something colder, and far more consequential. This rebellion strikes at the heart of the one thing Trump values above all else: unchecked power. It's not about a broken promise here or there, whether it's Trump's vow to avoid new wars, the rising cost of living, or the long-delayed disclosures he promised that have yet to materialize. No, this rebellion goes beyond that. Republican lawmakers, the people closest to Trump, are starting to openly oppose the very authority that he's clinging to. And when that happens, when the safeguards within the system start to work, presidents don't respond calmly. They escalate. They dramatize. They declare emergencies. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Trump is leaning into spectacle and crisis rhetoric, trying to protect himself from the potential collapse of his presidency. At the heart of this rebellion is a simple yet terrifying truth that even the most seasoned Washington insiders are struggling to comprehend out loud. The President of the United States has been seriously entertaining the idea of using military force in ways that could lead America into conflict, not with a distant enemy, but with its own allies. This isn't just some hypothetical scenario. It's a situation that could set America on a path of conflict with its NATO allies. Senator Chris Murphy's blunt remarks on the matter hit hard, because the reality of the situation is too serious to ignore. The scenario, at first glance, might sound absurd until we remember that it's not a joke anymore. Greenland, for example, is not just some piece of real estate on a map. It's part of Denmark, and Denmark is a NATO ally. NATO's core principle is collective defense. If America were to take military action against Greenland, it wouldn't just be a symbolic gesture, it would be a legal and strategic disaster, one that could place the United States in direct conflict with Europe. The fact that lawmakers now have to explain this basic concept to the public shows how far off course the conversation has gotten. No one voted for a presidency that could risk starting a shooting war with America's own allies over something as trivial as land acquisition rhetoric. And yet, here we are, analyzing comments and speculating on hypothetical outcomes. We're watching Trump's own party quietly but resolutely trying to shut the door on this madness before it can get worse. This rebellion is no longer just about broken promises or lost voter support. It's about the dangerous territory Trump is now entering, where even his own party members are having to confront the consequences of his rhetoric and actions. The reason this revolt against Trump matters is not just about disappointed supporters or over promises that have yet to be fulfilled. It's about Republican lawmakers themselves beginning to stand in opposition to the very power Trump has so desperately clung to. And this is where things start to get serious. When members of your own party begin to oppose your authority, that's when the system starts to activate its safeguards. Presidents don't take that lying down, they react with anger, escalation, and dramatic gestures. And we are witnessing that firsthand. Trump's response to this internal revolt isn't one of reason or negotiation. It's one of rage, deflection, and emergency declarations. We've seen it happen before. When push comes to shove, Trump frames everything as an emergency. Emergency declarations aren't just policy tools for him, they are political weapons. And we've seen this play out in real time with the national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets. The strategy is clear. Frame yourself as the protector of national security while casting any dissenting voices as obstacles to that security. It doesn't matter that the reality behind such declarations is far more complicated, involving long timelines, massive corporate interests, and benefits that flow primarily to multinational corporations instead of everyday Americans. That's not the point. The point is to centralize control, to shift the conversation, to dominate the narrative. The concept of emergencies is about more than just creating a sense of urgency. It's about consolidating power. Because in a state of emergency, everything changes. Rules bend, authority becomes centralized, and uncomfortable questions are pushed aside. The underlying reality, the questions about transparency, the delayed document releases, the stalled promises can be swept under the rug in the name of urgency. And this is where Trump's biggest weakness lies. There's one thing he can't afford right now, and that's scrutiny. He has already faced multiple inquiries into his administration's lack of follow-through on promises of transparency, whether it's the long-delayed disclosures or the questions about why certain oversight measures only move forward after bipartisan pressure. The growing concern is that the process itself is breaking down. Lawmakers are starting to ask the uncomfortable questions. Why are these documents delayed? Why have deadlines been missed without explanation? And when senators like Sheldon Whitehouse start talking publicly about compliance failures and unanswered timelines, it signals something serious. These aren't just political talking points. They're red flags. Trump has always relied on one thing: the ability to dominate the narrative, to flood the zone with distractions, to keep the public's attention bouncing from one crisis to another. But when the scrutiny becomes systemic, when it's no longer just a matter of headlines or scandal, but rather the systematic breakdown of governance, Trump's strategy begins to unravel. And the truth is, Republicans know this. They understand that the real danger here isn't necessarily what Trump is doing in the moment, it's what happens if this unchecked power becomes normalized. Because if they don't act now, the damage will be irreversible. So, this internal revolt isn't just about defending principles. It's about preserving the integrity of the system. It's about recognizing that once a president starts treating the system as something to be manipulated for personal gain, the consequences are far-reaching. And that's why even the most loyal Republicans are starting to think twice. They understand that loyalty to Trump isn't just about standing behind him, it's about protecting the country's foundational principles. And if they don't step in now, they could lose everything. At the heart of this internal revolt lies a simple but terrifying reality that even seasoned political veterans are struggling to comprehend. Trump's approach to geopolitics is more about deals, leverage, and property than it is about alliances, treaties, and shared security obligations. When Trump talks about military action, he doesn't see it through the lens of diplomacy or international law. He sees it as a transaction, a deal to be made or forced if the right pressure is applied. This kind of thinking may work in a boardroom, but in global politics, it doesn't just risk lives, it could destroy relationships that have been carefully built over decades. Republican senators know this. They understand that once a president frames military action as an option, the machinery of war starts moving whether Congress likes it or not. That's why the War Powers Act, once an abstract debate among legal scholars, has suddenly become the front line in this battle. The act isn't just about legalities. It's become a safety net. It's the emergency brake that Congress can pull when the president pushes too far. And that's exactly what happened when Republicans, alongside Democrats, moved to advance a resolution limiting Trump's ability to act unilaterally. But instead of negotiating or seeking compromise, Trump responded with rage. The outbursts, the profanity, and the threats were a clear signal that for Trump, this wasn't just about policy, it was personal. And that's the crux of the problem. Trump believes power is something to be wielded personally, not institutionally. And when that personal power is questioned, he lashes out. This wasn't just a minor disagreement. When Trump reportedly called Senator Susan Collins, it wasn't about one vote. It was about something much deeper: Trump's realization that loyalty has limits, even within his own party. For someone who has built his entire political persona on projecting strength, inevitability, and control, There's nothing more damaging than seeing that control slip away, especially when it's members of his own party who are pulling back. It's an existential threat for him. And this is where the narrative takes a dark turn. Trump doesn't retreat in the face of opposition. He reframes the situation. He takes the language of crisis and turns it into a weapon. And that's exactly what we're seeing as he reaches for the rhetoric of emergency declarations. The declaration of a national emergency regarding Venezuela's oil assets is a textbook example of this pattern. In Trump's view, emergencies are not just tools for addressing immediate threats, they are mechanisms for maintaining political power. By casting himself as the sole protector of national security, he can frame dissenters as obstacles to that security. But in reality, the situation is far more complicated. The timeline is long, the benefits largely accrue to multinational corporations, and the infrastructure is uncertain at best. None of this matters in Trump's narrative. The point isn't to address a real crisis, it's to create one. It's to shift the conversation away from uncomfortable questions, to centralize power, and to keep the public distracted from the growing concerns about transparency and oversight. But as much as Trump leans into this crisis narrative, there's something more insidious happening beneath the surface. The questions about transparency, why long-promised documents have been delayed, why certain disclosures are stuck in limbo, are becoming harder to ignore. These aren't just minor delays. They are a sign that something is wrong in the administration's process. And the more that lawmakers, including figures like Sheldon Whitehouse, start raising these questions, the more it puts the administration on the defensive. This isn't about accusations of wrongdoing, it's about process failures. And process failures are the last thing a presidency built on spectacle and chaos can afford. As the pressure continues to build, the stakes have shifted. The issues at hand are no longer just about policy disagreements or legislative battles. They've evolved into something far more fundamental, a test of whether the American system of governance can still function when faced with a president who seems to believe that his personal judgment should take precedence over the law, over treaties, and over constitutional norms. The deeper this internal rebellion goes, the clearer it becomes that Republicans aren't just trying to navigate a difficult political moment. They're trying to preserve the very framework of American democracy. The revolt among Republicans is now less about allegiance to Trump and more about the preservation of the institutions they once championed. The War Powers Act, the push for transparency, the questions about accountability, these aren't just isolated issues. They're symptoms of a larger problem, a presidency that is increasingly at odds with the system it governs. And the more Trump leans into the rhetoric of emergency and dominance, the more it forces Republicans to decide where they stand. Are they willing to back a president who is willing to undermine the very system of checks and balances that has kept the country stable for centuries? Or will they take a stand, even at the risk of alienating their own base, to protect the Constitution from a president who seems determined to rewrite it? For Trump, this is a crisis of his own making. He's pushed the system to the breaking point, and now, as the pressure mounts, he is doing what he does best: distracting. He creates distractions, shifts the conversation, and raises the stakes to try to regain control. His reliance on emergency powers, war rhetoric, and the language of crisis is designed to do one thing: keep the public's focus on the spectacle, not on the substance. Because the longer the conversation stays focused on emergencies and national security, the less attention there is on the questions that are truly troubling for his administration. The delays in document releases, the lack of transparency, and the unanswered questions surrounding his promises. Republicans, however, are beginning to understand that this is no longer just a political issue. It's a structural one. A president who believes that power is personal and unaccountable isn't just a threat to the opposition, it's a threat to the entire political system. And some Republicans, once loyal to Trump's cause, are beginning to recognize the danger that his behavior poses to the very institutions they've spent their careers defending. For them, the real risk isn't what Trump is doing today, it's what happens if his unchecked power becomes the new normal. If they don't act now, they may find themselves living in a system where the rule of law is secondary to the whims of one man. The growing concern among Republican lawmakers isn't just about the power Trump is wielding now. It's about what could happen if this power is normalized. Once the boundaries begin to erode, once the system is bent to accommodate a leader who treats the law as optional, it becomes far harder to rein it back in. This isn't just about stopping Trump, it's about ensuring that future presidents don't follow in his footsteps. And that's why Republicans are beginning to speak out, even in quiet, cautious ways. They understand that their silence now could mean the end of the system they know. The stakes have never been higher. As this internal rebellion reaches its boiling point, the real story is no longer just about Trump's words or his erratic behavior. It's about the system itself, the system that, until now, has allowed the US government to function under a framework of law, checks, and balances. What we're witnessing is a fundamental test. Can the American system of governance survive when the presidency begins to undermine its own institutional integrity? Can the political machinery continue to function when it's being pushed to the edge by a leader who views every challenge to his power as an existential threat? This revolt from within Trump's own party is the most significant signal yet that the system is beginning to fight back. It's not a question of ideology anymore. It's about the survival of the system itself. Republican lawmakers, once firmly aligned with Trump, are now being forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. A presidency built on personal power, driven by impulse and grievance, is not sustainable in the long run. And the more Trump escalates his rhetoric, the more desperate his attempts to control the narrative, the more he alienates those who once stood by him. The language of emergency, the constant calls to act decisively, the framing of opposition as sabotage, all of this is starting to wear thin, even within his own party. The real test for Republicans, however, is whether they will act in time. History is not kind to those who stand by in silence while the foundations of democracy crumble. And while many Republican lawmakers may feel the pressure to stay loyal to Trump, the reality is that loyalty to one man is not loyalty to the system. The system, the Constitution, the rule of law is what they swore to protect when they took office. And right now they're faced with a stark choice: to stand with Trump and risk enabling a presidency that threatens to collapse the very foundations of American democracy, or to stand up and reclaim their constitutional duties, even if it means going against the president and the political base that once supported him. The revolt within the Republican Party is not just about policy disagreements. It's about survival, both for the party and for the institutions that define American governance. This moment will not be defined by who wins the next news cycle or who dominates the next election. It will be defined by whether the rules that govern power still hold when the people who temporarily hold it begin to bend or break those rules for personal gain. The outcome of this revolt, this internal reckoning, will set the stage for the future balance of power in the United States. And as this story unfolds, one thing is clear: the American political system is being tested in ways it hasn't been for generations. The real story here is not the public drama, not the tweets or the rallies, but the quiet decisions being made behind closed doors. Republican lawmakers are no longer just deciding how to support Trump, they're deciding how to preserve the system that has allowed America to function as a democracy for so long. The question they are grappling with is not whether they will win or lose a political fight, but whether they will protect the institution itself from the very power it has been designed to constrain. What happens next will not only define Trump's presidency, but will also shape the future of American democracy. Because when a president begins to view the system as something to be dominated rather than governed, the question stops being partisan, it becomes structural. And in that moment, it's not just about the future of one presidency, but about the future of the United States as a nation governed by laws and principles, not by the whims of one man. The revolt within the Republican Party is the first sign that the internal guardrails of American democracy are still working, even if quietly. And for those who are watching, it's a powerful reminder that the future of power in the United States may not be determined by the loudest voices, but by the quiet resistance of those who refuse to let the system be broken from within.